Hi y'all, Lizzie here. I thought I would bring y'all out to the garden with me today and kind of show you what I've got going on out here and what we're working on. Look at this little farm friend hanging out in my cucumber vines. Isn't he or she just darling? I'm hoping you'll eat some of these cucumber beetles for me. I would so appreciate that. So I'm hanging out here in the garden. The gnats are absolutely crazy over here, which I'm sure is why that frog is there. He's trying to get a little snack. But I do want to show y'all what we've still got going on in, gosh, mid to late October here. We're in zone 8A in central, more eastern part of central North Carolina, and some of our summer stuff is seriously like making the most of this weather. Let me show you. So as you can see, we still have tons and tons of tomatoes on this one plant. This is a Wapsipinicon peach tomato plant, and it is my lone surviving tomato plant. I just ripped my last couple stragglers out yesterday, but holy moly, the amount of tomatoes still on this thing. Oh, I just saw I missed a cucumber. Let me get that real fast. So kind of a funny thing happened this year when I planted my cucumbers. I planted them on the same trellis as my tomato plant, and I thought surely by the time these cucumbers are taking off, my tomato plants will be fading. I could go ahead and pull this one off of here. And this tomato plant, it's a Wapsipinicon peach, and it has been by far the most resilient variety that I planted this year. I planted these. I also had an indeterminate variety of cherry tomato. I don't know what it was called. I got it from a garden center like really late in the season. And then I had also planted climbing triple crops. My climbing triple crops actually didn't give me a single tomato this year, and I don't think that was through any fault of their own. My tomatoes had a really rough year this year. They got planted into a bed that had like little to no sun, and then they got moved in midway through the growing season. They did not really appreciate that. And it was just kind of a weird year for us this year. Since we bought this house in June and moved, I brought most of my garden from the rental that we had been staying in, and some things did really well and some things just really didn't, and that's okay. I tried, and we did get some stuff this year, not as much as I would have liked, but enough that we've been able to have some meals where all of the vegetables on our plates were grown by me, and that feels really good. And it was really nice to still get to have that, even if it wasn't the growing season that I hoped for in my heart. But next year will be better because I won't have to move everything. I know where the sun is on this property. I've got the garden going, and next year will just be a lot better. But yeah, this tomato plant, I'm actually blown away. It has survived through one of the hottest summers that I've ever been through, and I've lived in the South for like 90% of my life. It was getting into like the 110s this summer here, which is not normal. I mean, it might be normal going forward, but it certainly hasn't been the kind of weather that we've had in the past. It was also very, very dry. It was either feast or famine with regard to the rainfall this year. We varied between weeks and weeks with no rain at all, and then we would get a hurricane, and then we got another hurricane, and then another hurricane, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but this tomato plant has done amazingly well. It's still producing tons of tomatoes. It looks good. It's getting a little bit brown here and there, but it has withstood pests and disease better than any other tomato plant that I've planted this year. So I saved the seeds off of this one, and I will be absolutely planting more of it next year. So back here on the other side of the tomato plant that just won't quit, I've got my okra plants. As you can see, they're still going, and I've got a red burgundy and a crimson spineless here behind me, and then I have another red burgundy down at the other end of the garden. Of the two varieties, I absolutely prefer the red burgundy, both for the kind of fruit that it produces, and also it's just done so much better than the crimson spineless did. It's been a lot more resistant to pests, and it has also produced way more okra than the crimson spineless did. I've gotten probably 3 times the okra off of this plant than I did off of the crimson spineless right next to it, and same growing conditions, started exactly the same, all of that. And the crimson spineless is starting to look a little bit puny. I'm probably gonna go ahead and take it out later this week. But this one, I'm just gonna let it go and see how long it'll keep giving us okra, because as long as there's okra growing, I'm gonna eat them. That's one of my favorite vegetables. So I've even converted my husband onto okra, and he was an okra hater before this year. So 2 thumbs up for that. Definitely gonna be growing more of this variety next year. And if you have a favorite okra variety, definitely let me know in the comments, because I'd love to try out more. These are the only 2 I've ever planted, and I'm always on the hunt for a good okra. So definitely let me know your suggestions in the comments. So this down here is one of my 2 remaining summer squash. This is an early prolific. As you can see, we've got quite a bit of powdery mildew going on here, and the fruits that are left on are just kind of rotting off. I can't tell if they are rotting off because of poor pollination. I do suspect that that is the case, but it could also be an issue with the nutrients in the soil just being kind of depleted at the end of the season. I did amend this bed partway through the summer with a couple inches of compost, but I also have some really heavy feeders in this bed. I had 3 squash plants in here. You can see I took the other 2 out. I've got 2 okra plants right next to it, as well as cucumbers and tomatoes in here, so it could very well be that the soil just needs a break, and that's why we're not really getting fruit off of this anymore. I am gonna go ahead and pull it because it's looking pretty sad and it's not producing anymore, so there's not really, you know, any use in keeping it in here. However, I did really love this variety. True to its name, it started producing squash so early, and we got tons of squash off of each of the plants. So yeah, definitely gonna plant this one again next year. Y'all, look at this nubby little calendula. I planted these out here just to kind of see how they would do, and it was really late in the season when I planted them, but like, that is actually so funny. It's so small and it's trying to bloom. It's trying so hard. I don't know how it's gonna do, but hopefully we can get some seeds off of it. Let's talk about the beans. So I mentioned earlier that we had a really hard time with our rainfall distribution this year. It was very much too much rain or not enough rain, and the beans really suffered the most with that. So this bed back here, you can see I've got like a few beans. I think there's four of them in here, and I sowed probably 60 beans in this bed just this succession. I actually sowed beans 3 times this year. Once at the rental, like the normal beginning of the season. They did really well, but it just didn't make sense to bring them with us here, or so I thought at the time. There was like 30 plants, and beans are a really short crop, so I knew I had plenty of time to resow them, probably twice more in the growing season, and I did sow them twice more but each time, just the way it worked out was really unlucky. Each time I sowed them, as soon as they would start to come up a couple weeks later, we would get hit with a hurricane. So like I would sow them, the weather would look really good, and then 2 weeks later, boom, hurricane. We get like 6 inches of rain, they get flooded, and they died both times. This is the last sowing that I'll be able to do this year. I could kind of like try it and see how long our frost holds out for, but we're really getting down to the wire, and by the time I realized that most of this sowing was killed by the rain, it was really too late. We were like really towing that line of not having enough time to get beans off of them, and they're strike bush beans, so they would have produced for a long time. We would have gotten a lot of beans off of them. So we might get a couple handfuls off of these for enough for, you know, maybe a little snackaroo one day, but yeah, definitely not going to be planting beans in this bed next year. This bed is the one that gets the soggiest during a heavy rainfall. So next year I'll be putting my thirstier plants in there, like my cucumbers, my squash, things of that nature that always want more water, and seeing how they do in here. I'll also be adding some branches. That's my neighbor. I'll also be adding branches and sticks and stuff off the property to this bed and kind of mixing those into the soil before I amend it to help with absorbing some of that excess moisture and giving this bed a little bit more drainage. Anywho, so yeah, I'll be planting beans in one of the beds that's further up. This whole area that the garden's in has a really, really subtle slope down to our creek, which is right back there. So this bed is definitely one of the lower points in the garden, and I will not be planting things that don't like too much water here in the future. So over here I have my very first attempt ever at growing broccoli. I believe these are actually broccolini. And you can see I just took the main head off of this one, and it's got some more that are coming out. This one still hasn't started to put off any kind of head whatsoever. And then the same case with this one over here. So I'm not sure like if I did something wrong with them or if it's just not at that point yet. I've never grown broccoli before, like I said, or really any brassica, so I'm not 100% sure. But this one's looking really good. So yeah, I'm pretty proud of that. And broccoli is one of my favorite vegetables, so I would absolutely love to have some garden broccoli. So I know that y'all won't judge me for this, but I still feel like I have to say it. Like, don't judge me. But this bed behind me, I've let go basically completely to weeds. I still have a basil plant in there that's still doing really well, and strangely hasn't shown any sign of bolting yet, which is really bizarre to me because I haven't been doing that great of a job of keeping it trimmed. But it still tastes great. I just made pesto chicken last night with a big bunch that I cut off of it. So I'm just kind of waiting until that basil dies with our first frost, and then I will be dealing with this bed. Let me show it to you. So here it is. I told you. And there's the basil plant. Still doing really well. We had a really cold night recently where it got down to like 40, and I believe that this is cold damage right here from that. So but otherwise it's looking really good. And that brings us to probably my favorite thing about the garden right now, which is this absolutely huge patch of squash. It has even taken my row marker. Look at that. it said these are mine now. And also this. Absolutely wild. This vine right here, I'll show you. So we've got a fruit right there. A fruit right there. And this is the plant right here. So it goes all the way over there. This vine's probably like 30 feet long. And all of this squash is 4 winter squash plants. If you can see, I've got a summer squash right here. You kind of see the difference in the leaves. These are more round and these are more star-shaped and pointed. Yeah, this summer squash is still doing really well. This one's younger than the one in the other bed, and it's enormous, which really makes me feel like my gut instinct about that other bed just really being tired and spent for the season is right, because this plant is huge and it's still putting off plenty of squash. And yeah, we've got some, oh, there's one right there. And then I don't know if y'all will be able to see it. Here, I'll walk around to the other side. There's another one right there. And there's even more little ones that just aren't developed enough to really show y'all. So just, it's growing wild. And the cool thing about these winter squash is that they are actually landrace varieties. So the 2 here closest to me are called Nanticoke, and the 2 down there are Desert Spirit. And they're both land races, which means that you'll get a whole variety of different traits within the same species. So I really would like to do some selective squash breeding, and I think developing my own variety would be really, really fun. I absolutely love squash. By far my favorite vegetable to eat and my favorite to grow. I am obsessed to the point where my husband is totally sick of squash and I'm not, to be honest. So yeah, definitely going to be growing more of these and saving the seeds for next year. Oh my gosh, look y'all, there's even more. And I will also say something that has been really, really cool about these landrace squash is how resistant to pests they have been. I had cucumber beetles absolutely decimate one of my summer squash that was planted right next to these, and these were like completely unfazed. So that's definitely a trait that I would love to perpetuate in future plantings of these. And I got these seeds from the Experimental Farm Network. If you're a genetics nerd like me, definitely check out what they have. They've got tons of different plants and different landrace varieties like tomatoes, herbs, squash, all kinds of stuff. So definitely check them out. Over here next to the squash jungle, I've got another weedy bed. These weeds right here are actually violets, and we have tons of wild violets here. That is like one of the most stubborn weeds that I have, but to be quite honest, I would rather have the violets than have like grass or spurge or something like that, because the violets are actually a medicinal plant. So when I'm weeding them, I can still use those leaves and flowers for medicinal purposes, which is really great. And as you can see, I've got them like all in the borders along the side over here. They're almost impossible to kill here, but that's okay. I don't mind them that much. And then in here, I've got beets. Kind of a similar story with the beets as with the beans. Every time I planted these, we got a huge rain. So these were planted in really nice rows all throughout this bed, and they washed into these clumps, which I have since thinned and I'll probably weed this bed out really well and then do another succession of them because I freaking love beets. They're one of my favorite root vegetables, and I just really want more beets than, you know, these 10 plants right here. Okay, so this afternoon sun is getting so low and like right in my eyes, but we're right at the last bed that I have planted right now. And it's mostly leafy greens. I've got a bunch of different lettuces in here, like a mesclun mix, as well as some red romaine, and then I also have carrots in here. So here are the carrots. I've got them growing kind of like haphazardly in here. I actually used seed tape to plant these, and they did really well with that method. So I'm definitely gonna do that again. The germination wasn't what I had hoped, but again, I planted them and then we got a hurricane. So I will definitely be sowing more into the rest of this bed. And then in this row, this is like the only thing I have right now that's still somewhat in its row. I've got leafy greens. This is just a lettuce mix. These are starting to get big enough now that I can start taking leaves off of them. And these are really, really good. And then some more down here. Look at that tiny little baby and how red it is. Oh, I love it. So again, keeping with the same theme, I really need to weed that bed out really well, and then I'll be planting more leafy greens in there and more carrots and probably more beets as well. So yeah, that's the garden right now. I've got these beds empty still, and then I'm about to move this row of landscape fabric over and then amend this row. And I'm still deciding what I want to plant in here, but I'm thinking probably peas is gonna go in here. All right, y'all, well that brings us to the end of our impromptu garden tour. I've got my little basket of produce here, and I am going to get a little weeding done and then call it a day. If you have any favorite varieties for us to try next year, definitely drop them in the comments. I have most of my seeds bought for next year already, but as y'all know, there's always room for a couple more varieties. So drop your faves in the comments. If you've watched this whole thing, thank you so much. I know it was a little bit long, but I just really love sharing this stuff with y'all, and I'm looking forward to doing more of it and having more to show you as our farm grows. So thank you so much for hanging out with me in the garden today. I will talk to y'all very soon. If you want more garden tours, be sure to give us a thumbs up on this video, subscribe to our channel, and yeah, I'll see y'all soon. Bye.